Michuki, can you do a test?
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. All right. So I think I can start again, if that's okay. All right. Bonjour à tous. My name is
Hello, everyone.
Hold on a second. All right. So I hope that you can hear me well. So maybe I'll just start again by thanking OSIANE, especially Monsieur Luc, for the ongoing partnership in supporting the organization of the Central Africa Peering Forum alongside OSIANE. We value the progress that we are seeing in terms of growing the peering and interconnection ecosystem and movement in Central Africa region. And we are hopeful that we'll be able to continue doing this because we as an organization at Internet Society, we are keen to continue working with partners and stakeholders in Africa and beyond to extend sustainable and resilient internet connectivity to those who need it the most. Now, I'd like to go straight to my interventions today. And in talking about the challenges of policies and regulations that we are seeing emerging around the world and here in Africa as well, that we may want to just pay close attention to. I'd like to first start by saying that policymakers and regulations in Africa have really come a long way. We've seen a lot of positive progress over the years. We've seen a huge increase in the number of people getting connected across the continent. And we've seen progressive policies being implemented to help increase the number of people who are connected. So there's been a lot of positive progress. But at the same time, there is still always room for improvement and also room where changes may happen that may not have positive effects or what we call unintended consequences, where policies that are developed to address certain issues may have a negative effect on the ecosystem as a whole. So I'll talk about three emerging policy trends that we are seeing that are likely to have a negative effect on the growth, development, and investment of the internet in our region. So the first one I want to talk about is an emerging policy and regulation trends that's leading to a direct impact in the adoption and use of the internet. And this is in relation to content blocking and the banning of applications. We've seen this happening across a number of countries, not just in Africa, but globally. And this is having, while it is trying to address in some situations concerns to do with security, concerns to do with safety of the citizens, and various other reasons why the content blocking and banning of applications are being made. We are also seeing that this does tend to have a challenge when it comes to users. So I'll give an example here where we've seen some social media platforms that have been blocked, whereas these platforms have actually been largely used as a sort of a marketplace for doing business across the continent in various countries. So essentially, that means that the traders and the people who are actually going to purchase goods and services from these platforms are at a disadvantage. And that has a potential impact in the adoption of internet, because what that means is that the reliance or dependence on certain platforms as a place for doing business is actually put into doubt. So what happens is that users will no longer make the investment, or entrepreneurs, business people will no longer make the investment on online platforms, because there's this constant threat or lack of a guarantee that this platform will be available tomorrow or the day after as a place where they can actually go and do business. And so that presents an adoption challenge for anyone who's looking to make investment in that platform, for users who are looking to use that platform to conduct business or to expand their markets, to get access to goods and services that they rely on. So it then tends to push people back to the non-digital ways of doing businesses. And that in itself is not working towards advancing bridging the digital divide or digitizing economies, which is a vision that is shared across not just by policymakers and governments, but also by private sector and civil society alike. The other issue that is an emerging trend that is also having a similar impact is overtaxation of content producers and providers. We've seen an introduction of taxes at various levels, either for users who are trying to access the internet. We've seen taxes and regulation coming in, targeting people who are actually trying to produce content online or to host content online. And that is creating a level of, I'll say, introducing barriers that are preventing people to go online and conduct business. And that in itself is creating an additional challenge, where people will prefer not to go to invest where their taxation is high. And as a result, the adoption of the internet is sort of suffering as a result of that. At the same time, it sort of serves as a deterrent for local investors, because they now have to compete with more established foreign or international organizations that can leverage on their large economies of scale, who will not feel the challenge of actually paying the taxation that's being applied. And so as a result, what happens is that local innovation is stifled. And so local innovators who want to build content hosting platforms, or platforms that can provide similar services as international operators, will not be able to do so, because they do not have the capital or the ability to actually pay the taxes that's being levied on them. So there is a challenge on taxation. And so looking at these two issues, it certainly calls for more dialogue to happen between the stakeholders and the policymakers to find solutions that can actually try to address what the root issue is, as opposed to introducing the policies and regulation that sort of have unintended consequences that affect the uptake and adoption and growth of the internet, and also the investment of the internet. My final point is an emerging issue which we've also seen happening across the sub-regions. We've seen this in East Africa, and we've seen it in Southern Africa. And this is a policy to promote the interconnection of cross-border internet exchange points. We've spoken at length about this issue, and I'd like to also share it with the Central African region, because it does have potential challenges when it comes to the implementation. Interconnecting independent cross-border IXPs, first and foremost, is not encouraged, because it's in direct competition with operators that are actually providing that service across borders. So you will have operators that provide IP transit across borders. So when exchange points join that sort of service or try to provide that service, they are sort of now going into direct competition with some of their customers, because some of those networks will be connecting to the internet exchange point. So that creates the first initial challenge to the proposals or suggestions to interconnect IXPs. It means you are likely to lose, either go into direct competition with those peers, and those peers are likely to disappear from the internet exchange point because it's a competitor. So that becomes a challenge. The second challenge is trying to establish what the business model that will be used for the interconnection. How do you charge operators and networks across? The third issue that also emerges is how do you then set up these networks across this interconnection? Are you actually turning internet exchange points to be IP transit providers, or are you doing it at a layer 2 level? At a layer 2 level, where exchange points operate, it becomes a lot more complex. It becomes a question of like running 2 exchange points. And there comes a new risk that the larger IXP is more likely to benefit over the smaller IXP. So there is a risk that the smaller IXP may actually lose its value over the larger IXP that becomes available at the local because of that cross-border interconnection. So, I'll give an example. If country A is a larger market compared to country B, and those 2 internet exchange points are interconnected at a layer 2 level, then the larger IXP, which has a lot more content, a lot more networks interconnected, will become more favored over the smaller IXP in country B or in country 2. That means the growth of the peering ecosystem in this smaller country will not happen, because the focus now will go into the larger country or growing the peering ecosystem in the larger country. And that's probably not what is intended, but that is an outcome that is likely to happen. If it is to move it at a layer 3 level, where the exchange points become sort of the carriers of the traffic without doing it at a layer 2 level, then that means the exchange points really become competitors to the cross-border operators. And that in itself introduces new challenges from a technical operational perspective and so on. And that is not something that you would want to sort of put your exchange points to be doing or dealing with at that level. So what is the way forward? The way forward is to promote cross-border interconnection in terms of competition on cross-border interconnection. The more the number of networks are crossing borders, offering cross-border services, it means that the operators in both countries can now offer competitive services between the borders, and that will bring down the cost of cross-border interconnection. Networks will peer, multiple networks between that exist in both markets or countries will connect at the exchange point, and they will provide that service. So they will actually promote the cross-border interconnection. And that's where you want to be, where the cost of cross-border is actually as low as what it costs at the national level. And a good example is what we see in Europe, where across many cities in Europe, Paris, London, Amsterdam, and so on, the costs of capacity between those capital cities in different countries is quite low, 10 gigabits of less than $1,000 and so on. But we cannot see similar pricing across our regions. And that's because we do not have competition and diversity across our border points. And we should aim to get to a point where there is diversity and competition across border points with multiple operators, so that we bring that cost down And that's where the value of interconnection will happen. And that will then help sort of grow the diversity of interconnection that really helps each peering ecosystem to grow, as opposed to having one becoming more dominant than the other. So I like to pause there, but also encourage that we take lessons from East Africa, where they tried this and it did not work. And also the conversations that we've had with the SADC, the Southern African Development Community, and just bring those conversations and experiences to the Central Africa region, and see how we can have those conversations with you to sort of promote progressive policies that don't end up having these unintended consequences that affect the growth of the internet. So thank you very much, Gila, and back to you.
Merci beaucoup, Michuki. Est-ce que nous pouvons applaudir pour Michuki?
For Michuki, please, on this very important point. Notre dernier